After breaking a 16-year playoff drought just 2 seasons ago, the Sacramento Kings have now fired their head coach after some of the most baffling losses of the season, and their best player may suddenly be on the trade block. By contrast to the energy and vibe that we saw from the Kings in their Light the Beam season, I am just extremely depressed with the direction that this franchise has gone. Hello everybody, welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and drop a like, and if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience, check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So far this season, the Sacramento Kings have a record of 14-19, and while that might be good enough for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, it certainly is not in this year's West. They are currently 12th in the standings. They just fired their head coach, Mike Brown. Their offense is 8th in the league, which is better than what it was last year when it took a little bit of a dip to 14th, but the defense has not been very good. In spite of that, their overall net rating is positive, and they overall are actually pretty damn good in the efficiency landscape around the league. They just keep managing to lose games in the clutch, which is extremely uncharacteristic of this team, as I believe in the 22-23 season, De'Aaron Fox literally won Clutch Player of the Year, and the Kings were known for their late game execution being as solid as it gets. On top of that, they added DeMar DeRozan, who I don't think has ever won Clutch Player of the Year, but has certainly been a very strong candidate for it since he's been on the Chicago Bulls. And even still, not a clutch team at all. The other day, they lost a game to the Detroit Pistons, which was their 5th loss in a row, off of an and-one Jaden Ivey corner three-pointer.
Over to Malik Beasley. Beasley to Ivey for the pump fake. Oh, he got fouled. Oh! Yes, he did! Yes, he did!
If you're up 3, you gotta guard your man at the 3-point line. And there should be no closeout opportunity. We told our guys, can't give up a 3, can't give up a 3, can't give up a 3. And we close out and we foul with 3 seconds to go. And to relax like that at that point in the game was tough.
De'Aaron, what did you see on the final play with the corner 3 from Jaden Ivey there?
I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's not gonna make anybody feel better. So,
yeah, the vibes were not very good. De'Aaron Fox also had further comments later on about the firing of Mike Brown. Very adamant that he was not behind it, and for the most part, I do believe him, because panicking and firing a head coach who otherwise is showing really good stuff is a very Sacramento Kings thing to do. Fox also said a couple of times to the media that he doesn't want a different head coach, which, like, obviously that's him just doing the NBA player PR type thing. But I don't know that a lot of the blame that Fox has been getting has necessarily been warranted. I think it primarily just stemmed from the construction of this roster just not being very good. So if we're looking at the efficiency landscape over, this is from Kirk Goldsberry, November 15th, not even that long ago. Overall, the Sacramento Kings were 4th in net rating, 5th in offensive rating, and 6th in defensive rating, making them one of the most efficient teams in the entire league. Then we get to December 20th, and their actual place is not highlighted here, but they're not in as pretty of a place as they were otherwise. Still pretty good offense, and then a respectable defense at this point. So the question is, should the Sacramento Kings have even fired Mike Brown? Was that the right move here? They, in their 18 losses under him, 11 of them were by a margin of 5 points or less, just to further illustrate how much it has been bridging small gaps that has been the problem. I don't think firing Mike Brown was the solution by any means. I also don't think that it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, like some people have also been arguing. I just think that's kind of the landscape of the NBA right now. Your highs are high and your lows are really fucking low, and no one gets punished for lows more than head coaches in the NBA. It has become the go-to move of just about every franchise to scapegoat the head coach. Mike Malone, the coach of the Denver Nuggets, actually experienced something very similar to this when he coached the Sacramento Kings back in the DeMarcus Cousins era. And after a pretty good start to the season, they had some injuries. The record suddenly didn't look so good, and he got fired after, I believe, over 500 start, which was like the only time that happened at all during the DeMarcus Cousins era. He said that they had no respect and no balls as a result of that. And yeah, I agree that the way this was done was really shitty, especially because apparently Mike Brown was literally in his car getting ready to go to a game and he received a text message. That's fucking bitch shit. Grow up and fire the man to his face if you're going to do it. I think Vivek Ranadive is one of the worst owners in all of sports. And, just because they finally made the playoffs for the first time in God knows how long, does not mean that those old habits had died. Stupid management bullshit, the owner being way too hands-on despite knowing nothing about basketball. All of that has persisted throughout the entirety of his tenure owning that team. From S over here, we have, it's crazy how quickly you can go from the media darling to the team on the brink of collapse. We're 2 seasons removed from Light the Beam, Mike Brown winning Coach of the Year, and Sacramento breaking the longest playoff drought in North American sports. Life/expectations comes at you fast. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about the Kings, because they were literally the Cinderella story of the league just 2 years ago, and now there's just nothing to cover that's not negative. I believe De'Aaron Fox had a comment that was like, great that the media is paying attention to us now that we're down, but they were paying attention to you guys when you were up. And then the season following that, you missed the playoffs, not because of like any major blunder to the degree of what we've seen this year, but I think that was bullshit, what he said. I think we gave them plenty of attention when they were up, and now here they are and they're down. And I think the overall sentiment around the league and around fan bases has just been, man, this sucks. We liked seeing the Sacramento Kings turn things around and actually be a franchise that can be competitive. So if we take a look at some of their stats from when they were the Beam team, when they won 48 games, Mike Brown won Coach of the Year. They managed to go to the first round of the playoffs versus the Golden State Warriors, and they lost that Game 7 primarily because Stephen Curry had over 50 points. Maybe it was just 50 or 51, something like that. Number 1 in offense. One of the greatest, I believe this was the greatest offense of all time at the time. It pretty much is whoever the best offense is every year now ends up being the best offense of all time. But the Sacramento Kings were a record-breaking offense, and they were a terrible defense. That obviously put a pretty big cap on how good they could be overall. But a near 50-win team in a Western Conference now... Is that just a difference of 2 games? It really feels like the difference is fairly negligible. The net rating says they should be good, and yet their record is bad. A lot of this is just the Western Conference is a fucking nightmare, and you can't even afford to be 2 points off with regularity. So if we look, Keon Ellis, De'Aaron Fox, and Keegan Murray all have A-plus perimeter defenses, at least in terms of their drives that they're stopping per game. It obviously does not help that Domantas Sabonis is not exactly a very strong rim protector, but having guys who can do a good job defending the perimeter does elevate or limit that weakness, rather. Fox, Sabonis, and DeRozan are combining for 68 points per game. Malik Monk is putting up 16 points per game off of the bench. Here's the one thing where if you were going to argue that Mike Brown needed to be fired or deserved to be fired, it would be in the way that he treated Keon Ellis this year. I am actually fucking baffled by how little Keon Ellis has played this year, because he was very clearly the perfect 5th starter for the team that they put together this offseason. The argument would be that Kevin Huerter is a better 3-point shooter, but I don't even know if that's technically true right now. Keon Ellis was a 40-plus 3-point percent shooter last year, on top of being one of the best point of attack defenders in the entire NBA. Meanwhile, Kevin Huerter, not a good point of attack defender, and pretty much exclusively a 3-point shooter, whose 3-point numbers have since dipped after the Beam season. A big part of the reason that they fell off a good bit offensively the season before this is because Kevin Huerter fell off rather dramatically, and he played a large part in the Beam season. Statistically, from Matt George here, we have the Kings are baffling. 2 of the best on-ball defenders in the league, a positive scoring differential, a top 10 offense, 3 scorers averaging 20-plus points per game, and yet they have this very negative record. Not very negative, but negative. We got this report that apparently nobody wanted to fire Mike Brown, which is a great way of just avoiding accountability altogether. We have Kenny here saying someone had to want to fire him. The Kings tried to make other changes before firing Brown. They inquired about Zach LaVine, Brandon Ingram, Cam Thomas, and Kyle Kuzma. All of those trades didn't work out, and they decided to move on from Brown. The thing that's very funny to me about that is, other than Zach LaVine, all of those trades are horrible ideas. Maybe you could talk yourself into Kyle Kuzma if you believe Kyle Kuzma is actually good, but I wouldn't say that he is, and I wouldn't want him starting over Keegan Murray. I wouldn't want him starting over Keon Ellis or Kevin Huerter if it has to be him. Brandon Ingram, are you fucking... Oh, you know who would be great? What if... Okay, we signed DeMar DeRozan, right? What if we got 2 inches taller DeMar DeRozan? Just an idea. The fact that these are their trade targets already tells me enough about how bad this franchise has been operating behind the scenes. And Brown became the scapegoat. And luckily, I think it hasn't really worked. I don't think almost anybody is blaming Mike Brown, really. Again, the Keon Ellis thing, basically coaching malpractice as far as I'm concerned, but when you contextualize that with everything else that he brought to the table, the fact that he was the coach that brought them out of the mud to begin with, and he won that Coach of the Year a season plus the 20-ish games of this one ago, doesn't really make a lot of sense. None of this makes a lot of sense. A lot of people have speculated that it was indeed De'Aaron Fox that got his head coach fired. This is what De'Aaron Fox said.
Is there anything that's kind of bugged you about maybe narratives that might be out there that...
I mean, I wish we got that type of coverage all the time, right? Like, now you're the talk of it because it's something bad happened. But, I mean, at this point, if you want to place that blame on me, like, I had no say-so. I found out 2 minutes before everybody else found out. I was standing in UPS, dropping off a package on the way to the airport. I found out just like everybody else. So, I mean, that is what it is. I'm done talking about that. If people think that was me, then it was me. Fuck it.
I have a disposition here towards the way that De'Aaron Fox has been acting to the media, because I don't know that it's a good move, but it has been an enjoyable one. But he has truly had a fuck it standpoint as his response to most of the stuff that has been coming his way. I don't know if that's the move, but I do enjoy it. This summer, when management consulted with Fox before awarding Brown a 3-year, $25 million extension, Fox gave his blessing, saying, "I don't want another coach." But Fox's decision not to sign an extension like his coach did this offseason sent a message that was consistent with his long-held priorities, winning and continuity. This season, and with Brown's dismissal, the team has done little of either. So yeah, that has been a thing that has been hanging over the Kings this whole time, is that he has not signed an extension. I don't think it's fair to put a brunt of the blame on that, but it certainly was not helpful. It was definitely a pressure point, similar to like when Giannis was, being like, I don't know if I'm going to come back. Who knows? We'll see. And then it causes the franchise to make some panic moves. Luckily, they've made better panic moves than the Sacramento Kings are capable of making. But either way, that was kind of a cloud that was hovering over this entire thing throughout the season. There has been much discussion because of that contract already going into this year, but especially given this context with the Kings, of should they trade De'Aaron Fox? And my answer to that is no, but you might have to. If it is a matter of De'Aaron Fox is leaving and you gotta do what you gotta do, then you gotta do what you gotta do. But I think abandoning the core of a team that got you in the playoffs for the first time after a 16-year drought, like, we did this thing with the Kings after their Beam season where we're like, all right, how do we get them into a contender category? I don't think that was ever going to happen. I really do not think a team built around a duo of Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox is going to be a championship caliber team. However, they could have been a good, consistent playoff team for a couple of years in a row, which I think, given the absolute hell that Sacramento Kings fans have been going through over the previous 2 decades, I would just say we're going to keep being okay, and we're okay with that. Maybe it's just not enough anymore given how tough the Western Conference is, but I just don't know that like rebuilding is going to do jack nor shit for this team other than putting them right back in the same place they were before this team came together. It's also worth mentioning that De'Aaron Fox has not been nearly as good this year. His 3-point percentage has dipped. His 3-point attempts have dipped. One very key thing that I said when the DeMar DeRozan sign-and trade situation happened, De'Aaron Fox's 3-point shot from last year better fucking hold up. If it doesn't, it's a problem because Sabonis isn't a 3-point shooter, DeMar DeRozan isn't a 3-point shooter, and De'Aaron Fox apparently isn't a very good 3-point shooter. Last year, he shot like 8 of them a game on like 37%. That's more than good enough. But if that's not going to hold up, which so far this season it hasn't, well, you're going to end up with a very negative 3-point shooting team. That's been a big part of this as well. 1.5 more threes last year. Actually, that percentage you displayed was even worse than this. Oh, that was cumulative? Yeah, no, he's fucking had a 5% dip in 3-point percentage while his volume has gone down. That's a huge problem. That's a fucking disastrous situation. For a team that was already taking a big risk in regards to its spacing with DeMar DeRozan's addition. Another big issue for them has been DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan wasn't really a good idea, especially given that De'Aaron Fox 3-point dip. Now, I thought that just having a little bit more of a guy who can just score one-on-one might be a positive for the Kings. I overall said that I liked it because I saw the potential it had. It's fair to say that it hasn't worked out on the positive end of those things. He overall has a negative net rating, and I believe if I saw a stat that he had like failed to cross the 20-point mark over his last like 6 or 7 games. Oh, he has 25 right there.
That's the first game after Mike Brown got fired.
That's funny. He had 2 points on 1 for 7 shooting versus the Indiana Pacers. Holy crap, that's bad. Yeah, man. That's just... So here's the thing. Another report that came out was DeMar DeRozan was apparently going to be asked to come off of the bench by Mike Brown, and that was something that contributed to his firing. I'll say it straight up. I don't care if this gets me hate. DeMar DeRozan is not a good option as a starting go-to offensive option in 2024. He's not. He was that option on the Chicago Bulls because the Chicago Bulls didn't have fuck else to do. But if you're actually trying to build a competitive team, building it around a guy who is a mid-range scorer, slashes a decent bit, but is not like some super high volume rim runner, and is a good playmaker but not a great one, a terrible defender, a complete non-floor spacer, and needs the ball in his hands to be effective, that's not a good option. It isn't. Not anymore. Not in the year of 2025, but it was 2024. DeMar DeRozan's just not a good option. And I had been saying this when he was on the Bulls, and everyone called me a fucking hater for it and saying it's just the Bulls' fault. But the only reason he was able to put up the numbers on the efficiency that he was on the Bulls is because he was the best player and best scorer. But if you're going to put him in a context where you're actually trying to compete and he has to be your third option, that's not going to fucking work. And it hasn't worked for the Kings. And if they had just simply invested that money in those assets into players that actually complemented the core of this team, you would have seen a very different result. And I almost guarantee you Mike Brown would be employed right now. As for what a De'Aaron Fox trade package would even actually look like, this is one that makes some sense to me. You're getting Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore, and a litany of pretty good first-round picks from the Rockets. Fred VanVleet is obviously there pretty much just as a salary filler. I don't even know that he would suit up for the Kings. There's a good chance they would reroute him elsewhere. It's not a bad return, getting a couple of picks, given that his contract is about to expire. He probably does not have a crazy amount of trade value. I also don't really know where De'Aaron Fox ranks in the league at this point. He's a great slasher. He's got a good mid-range shot. He had more positive signs as a three-point shooter last year. He's a good playmaker, and he's a pretty good defender. So, like, he's a good all-around player. But he's also not like someone who I'm like, oh man, if my team had De'Aaron Fox, it would fundamentally change things to the umpteenth degree. Like, it would have to be a situation where he is bona fide the second best player on the team. If you're training for De'Aaron Fox to be your best player, get ready for disappointment, because I just don't think he's that tier of guy. I think the Spurs would be awesome. I would love to see him on the Spurs. I would love to see a scoring and playmaking guard next to Victor Wembanyama. But that said, I don't really think there's a trade package that's going to make it okay that you're once again in a rebuild after almost 2 decades of rebuilding. It's just sad. It's very depressing. It's not something that I want to see. If I was a Sacramento Kings fan, I wouldn't be. That's what I would say. This video is a little all over the place, so apologize for that. But the point being, I cry. I cry every time.